My parents bought my younger brother a $450,000 house while I worked 2 jobs just to pay rent. They told me to stop being jealous, then years later, they came to me desperate for help after he lost everything. I, 29F, have always known my younger brother, Jake, 26M, was the favorite. My parents denied it, of course. They always used the same line. We love both our children equally. But when you grow up in a family, you notice patterns. Jake got away with things I never could. If he got a bad grade, it was because the teacher was unfair. If I got a bad grade, I wasn't working hard enough. When Jake dropped out of college after 1 semester, my parents told everyone he was finding himself. When I worked full-time while finishing my degree, they acted like it was simply what I was supposed to do. By the time I turned 22, I had moved out and was supporting myself completely. Rent, car payments, student loans, insurance, everything. There were months I worked 2 jobs just to stay afloat. Meanwhile, Jake was still living at home, sleeping until noon, working part-time whenever he felt like it. And somehow my parents acted like he was the one under pressure. I tried not to care. Life isn't always fair. I focused on building my career and paying my own bills. Then, 3 years ago, everything changed. My parents invited the whole family over for a special announcement. Everyone seemed excited. I honestly thought they were retiring. Instead, my dad stood up and proudly announced, "We bought Jake a house." The room erupted in cheers. My stomach dropped. A house. Not a down payment. Not help with closing costs. An entire house. My mother pulled out photos. Brand new kitchen. Large backyard. 3 bedrooms. Finished basement. The place looked amazing. And as everyone congratulated Jake, I sat there doing the math in my head. I had spent years struggling to make rent. Skipping vacations. Working weekends. Taking extra shifts. Meanwhile, my brother, who had never even lived on his own, was being handed a house. Then my mom smiled at me and said, "See? Good things happen when you're patient." I nearly choked on my drink. Patient? I'd been working 60-hour weeks. Jake had spent half his 20s playing video games in their basement. But the worst part came later. Because when I finally asked my parents why they never offered to help me the same way, their answer changed how I saw them forever. I tried to stay quiet during the celebration. I really did. Everyone else was admiring photos of Jake's new house, while my parents acted like they'd just won the lottery. Meanwhile, I couldn't stop thinking about the years I'd spent struggling. The apartments with broken heaters. The second job I worked every weekend. The nights I ate ramen because rent was due. Eventually, I pulled my parents aside. I wasn't angry. At least not yet. I just wanted to understand. "Can I ask you something?" My mom smiled. "Of course. Why did you buy Jake a house but never offer to help me?" The smile immediately disappeared. My parents exchanged a glance. Then my dad gave an answer that still makes my blood boil. "Because you never needed help." I actually laughed. I thought he was joking. He wasn't. "What are you talking about?" My mom folded her arms. "You've always been independent." I stared at her. "Independent because I had to be." "No," she replied. "Independent because you're responsible." That somehow made it worse. According to their logic, Jake was receiving hundreds of thousands of dollars because he was irresponsible. And I was receiving nothing because I wasn't. My dad continued. "Jake struggles more than you do." I nearly lost it. Struggles more? I was working 2 jobs. Jake worked 20 hours a week and lived rent-free. But apparently that counted as struggling. Then came the sentence that permanently changed my relationship with them. My mother looked me straight in the eye and said, "Stop being jealous of your brother." Jealous. Not hurt. Not confused. Not disappointed. Jealous. Just like that, every sacrifice I'd made was reduced to jealousy. The conversation ended badly. I left early and drove home furious. For weeks afterward, I barely spoke to my parents. Not because of the house. Not really. It was because they'd shown me exactly how they viewed us. Jake was someone who deserved rescuing. I was someone who could fend for herself. And once I saw that, I couldn't unsee it. So I stopped expecting anything from them. No financial help. No support. No fairness. Nothing. Instead, I focused on myself. I worked harder. Got promoted. Started building savings. Slowly, life improved. Then one day, nearly 2 years later, I bought my own home. No gifts. No family money. No help. Just me. I was proud of that. Until I called my parents to share the news. Because their reaction wasn't what I expected. In fact, they seemed almost annoyed. And a few weeks later, I found out why. It turned out Jake's free house wasn't going nearly as well as everyone thought. When I called my parents to tell them I'd bought my own home, I expected them to be happy. Not excited. Not emotional. Just happy. After all, I'd spent years working toward that goal. Instead, the conversation felt weird. My mom forced a smile. Oh, that's nice. Nice? I had just purchased my first home completely on my own. No family money. No down payment gift. No cosigner. Nothing. But somehow that's nice, was all she had to say. My dad wasn't much better. He asked a few questions about the neighborhood and then quickly changed the subject. The entire call lasted less than 5 minutes. At first I thought I was imagining things. Then, a week later, my cousin Sarah called. And suddenly everything made sense. Have you talked to Jake recently? She asked. No. Why? She laughed. Because he's a mess. Apparently, Jake's dream house wasn't turning out to be much of a dream. Not because there was anything wrong with the house. Because there was something wrong with Jake. For the past 2 years, my parents had continued paying for almost everything. Property taxes, home repairs, insurance, unexpected expenses, even some utility bills. I couldn't believe it. They hadn't just bought him a house. They were still funding his life. Meanwhile, I was paying every bill myself. Sarah continued. You know he almost lost the place last month, right? What? My stomach dropped. According to Sarah, Jake had stopped taking responsibility for the property entirely. Minor repairs became major repairs. Maintenance was ignored. Money disappeared as fast as he earned it. And every time something went wrong, he called Mom and Dad, who immediately bailed him out. Again. And again. And again. The more I heard, the less surprised I became. Because nobody had ever forced Jake to face consequences. Growing up, my parents solved every problem for him. Now they were doing the same thing as adults. Only the problems were much more expensive. Then Sarah told me something that genuinely shocked me. The house wasn't actually in Jake's name. It was still legally owned by my parents. I almost dropped my phone. Wait. What? Yeah, they never transferred it. Suddenly everything clicked. The reason they'd seemed uncomfortable when I bought my own house. The reason they barely congratulated me. The reason they changed the subject. Because my house represented something Jake didn't have. Independence. Ownership. Responsibility. Everything they'd spent years trying to avoid teaching him. Then things got even stranger. A few months later, my parents invited the entire family over for Thanksgiving. Normally, I would have declined. But Sarah convinced me to come. And thank God I did. Because during dinner, I accidentally overheard a conversation that changed everything. A conversation that revealed just how much money my parents had actually spent on Jake. And when I heard the number, I nearly choked on my drink. Thanksgiving started out surprisingly normal. For the first time in years, there wasn't any obvious family drama. People were eating. Kids were running around. Football was on in the background. Even Jake seemed relaxed. For a few hours, I actually thought maybe things had settled down. Then I went into the kitchen to grab another drink. And accidentally overheard my parents talking. They were in the pantry with the door partially closed. I wasn't trying to eavesdrop. In fact, I was about to walk away. Then I heard my dad say a number that stopped me cold. $612,000. I froze. My mom sighed. I know. But what choice do we have? My heart immediately started racing. $612,000? What on earth were they talking about? Then my dad said, if he loses the house after everything we've spent, it'll destroy us. The house. They were talking about Jake's house. I stood there silently, trying to process what I was hearing. My mom sounded exhausted. We can't keep doing this forever. My dad didn't answer. Because deep down, they both knew they already had. Later that evening, I casually brought it up with Sarah. The moment I mentioned the number, her eyes widened. Then she said something I wasn't supposed to know. Apparently, several family members already knew pieces of the story. Over the years, my parents had spent money on the house purchase, property taxes, insurance, repairs, credit card debt, car payments, personal loans, legal fees from a failed business venture Jake started. The total? Somewhere between $600,000 and $700,000. I literally couldn't speak. For comparison, my parents had never given me more than a birthday card and a Christmas gift. Meanwhile, they'd spent enough on Jake to buy multiple homes. The worst part? None of it had helped him. He still struggled financially. He still relied on them constantly. He still treated every crisis like someone else's responsibility. Then Thanksgiving took an even stranger turn. Toward the end of the night, my mom pulled me aside. She suddenly seemed interested in my life. My job, my house, my savings, everything. At first, I thought she was finally trying to connect with me. Then she asked a question that made my stomach drop. How much equity do you have in your house? I stared at her. What? She smiled nervously. Just curious. No, she wasn't curious. Something was wrong. Very wrong. And 2 weeks later, I found out exactly what it was. Because my parents called an emergency family meeting. And for the first time in their lives, they needed money. A lot of money. 2 weeks after Thanksgiving, my phone rang. It was my mom. The moment I answered, I knew something was wrong. She sounded nervous. Not her usual confident, everything is under control nervous. Genuinely nervous. We need to talk. Those 4 words are never good. An hour later, I was sitting in my parents' living room. Jake was there. My dad was there. And the atmosphere felt like someone had died. Nobody was making eye contact. Nobody was talking. Finally, my dad cleared his throat. Jake has a problem. I almost laughed. That sentence could have described the last 10 years. What happened now? The room went silent. Then my mom said it. The house is in danger. My stomach dropped. Apparently, Jake had spent years making terrible financial decisions. Again, there were unpaid debts, missed payments, personal loans, credit card balances, and a failed investment scheme that had wiped out most of his savings. What little savings he actually had. The situation had become so bad that my parents had exhausted nearly every option trying to save him. They had borrowed, refinanced, liquidated investments, used retirement funds, everything. And now they were running out of money. That's when I realized why my mom suddenly cared about my house. Why she'd asked about my savings. Why she wanted details about my finances. The answer hit me like a truck. They weren't interested in celebrating my success. They were evaluating it. Then my dad finally said the words. We need your help. There it was. The reason for the meeting. Not an apology. Not an acknowledgement of years of favoritism. A request. Actually, it wasn't even a request. It felt more like an expectation. How much? I asked. Nobody answered immediately. Then my mom quietly said, $150,000. I genuinely thought I'd misheard her. $150,000. I stared at them, waiting for someone to laugh. Nobody did. They were serious. Dead serious. My father started explaining how it would only be temporary. How family helps family. How they'd pay me back. The irony nearly gave me whiplash. For years, I had been told to stop being jealous. To be independent. To handle my own problems. Now suddenly family was supposed to help family. Interesting how that rule only appeared when they needed something. Then Jake finally spoke. And somehow he made everything worse. You have the money. Not, could you help? Not, I'm sorry. Not, I appreciate what you've accomplished. Just, you have the money. As if that settled the matter. As if years of sacrifice meant nothing. as if my savings existed solely to rescue him from another disaster. I looked around the room. At my parents. At Jake. At the people who had spent years pouring hundreds of thousands of dollars into one child while expecting the other to survive alone. And for the first time in my life, I didn't feel angry. I felt calm. Because I already knew my answer. What I didn't know was that my answer was about to trigger the biggest family meltdown I'd ever seen. And before the night was over, my father would reveal something that shocked even Jake. The room was completely silent. My parents were staring at me. Jake was staring at me. Waiting. Expecting. Assuming. As if the outcome had already been decided. I took a deep breath and said the simplest sentence I'd ever spoken. No. The reaction was immediate. My mom looked horrified. Jake looked offended. Actually offended. Like I'd done something unreasonable. "You're seriously not going to help?" he asked. I couldn't believe the audacity. For years, he'd received everything. A house, cars, debt bailouts, endless second chances. And somehow I was the selfish one. My dad tried one last time. Think carefully. I have. Family helps family. I almost laughed. Really? Since when? Nobody answered. Because they all knew exactly what I meant. For nearly a decade, I had watched them pour money, time, and energy into Jake while expecting nothing from him in return. Meanwhile, every achievement in my life had been treated as normal. Expected. Required. I paid my own way through adulthood. Bought my own home. Built my own savings. Created my own stability. And now they wanted me to sacrifice it to clean up a mess I didn't create. Again. The answer was still no. Then something unexpected happened. My father suddenly stood up. And for the first time in my entire life, he got angry at Jake. Not me. Jake. You know what? He snapped. The entire room froze. Because nobody had ever seen this before. Not once. Not ever. Jake looked stunned. Dad, you are 40 years old. Silence. You've spent your entire adult life expecting someone else to solve your problems. Jake's face turned red. My mom immediately tried to intervene. But my dad wasn't finished. Years of frustration seemed to pour out all at once. The house. The loans. The debt. The businesses. The cars. The credit cards. One after another. Every bailout. Every rescue. Every check. Every excuse. He listed them all. Then came the sentence nobody expected. Especially Jake. Buying you that house was the worst mistake we ever made. The room went dead silent. Even my mother looked shocked. Jake just stared. As if he'd been slept. Because for the first time, someone had said the thing everyone secretly knew. The house hadn't helped him. It had enabled him. Every rescue had made the next crisis bigger. Every bailout had delayed. Reality. And now reality had finally arrived. Over the next year, everything changed. My parents stopped funding Jake. Completely. No more checks. No more emergency transfers. No more secret bailouts. No more rescue missions. It wasn't easy. There were arguments. Phone calls. Months of drama. But eventually they held firm. The result? Jake was finally forced to take responsibility for his own life. For the first time ever. As for me, I kept my savings. Kept my house. Kept my peace. And something surprising happened. My relationship with my parents slowly improved. Not overnight. Not perfectly. But better. Because for the first time, they stopped seeing me as the child who didn't need anything. And started seeing me as the child they'd overlooked. One evening, nearly 2 years later, my dad quietly apologized. Not for everything. But enough. And honestly, that mattered more than the money ever could. The funny part is that my parents spent over $600,000 trying to give Jake a successful life. It never worked. The things that actually helped me succeed cost them nothing. Responsibility. Discipline. Accountability. The very things they spent years protecting him from. And that's the lesson I took from all of it. Sometimes the greatest gift parents can give their children isn't money. It's letting them face the consequences of their own choices.